Proof of vaccination or vaccine passports will be key to opening up after the long lockdown in New South Wales and for life getting back to normal in other parts of the country, as well as for travel overseas when that begins again. But it appears that each state and territory will have its own system of vaccination proof, and they are concerned about how easily certificates might be to forge. Here's Kate Atwell from the University of WA. Kate, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. So how will people in New South Wales be able to prove that they've had a double dose to go into cafes and to other areas? How will the system work?
So the New South Wales government has indicated that they'll be building that into the app that people currently use to check into venues for contact tracing purposes now. So that will have a kind of back-end link up to your vaccination certificate, which will be available on MyGov and Medicare, and in fact is already available for people who want to use apps like that at this point now.
And what are other states, what are they planning? Are they going the same way?
So Victoria have indicated that they will be moving towards a similar path as well, and they're planning to initially trial their project in the regions, obviously where there's less outbreaks of COVID presently. Other states are facing a bit of a difficult situation because the check-in mechanisms that they've been using are not designed to be identity checks, and so they don't have, at this point, the ability to build in that kind of backline connection so that you can demonstrate your vaccination through those apps. So they will either have to retroactively add that kind of functionality in or look at moving to a different system.
So if you're in New South Wales travelling to another state or territory, though, you will eventually be able to use your certificate to enter any venue anywhere?
Well, that's another point. So part of the beauty of being in a federal system is that all states do things their own way. So it is likely that you will actually need a state-specific app, just as you would need a state-specific app right now to check into venues. So I'm in Western Australia. My app is specifically for use here in my state. If I was travelling somewhere else and needing to check into a venue right now, I would need the local app. And I anticipate that would be the same for the kind of vaccine passport that we're now discussing.
What about the dangers of being able to forge a double vaccine certificate then, Katie? How secure is the technology?
So this is an interesting question, and of course the detail remains to be seen. What we know is that the technology connecting our vaccination status to the Australian Immunisation Register is strong, and presumably any kind of backline linking that to a state-based app would also be strong. But it's interesting, I wrote a piece about this in The Conversation that's just come out this morning, and several people wrote to me and said, we don't have smartphones. Now, right now, those people, when they enter a venue, sign in manually for contact tracing purposes. But what that's going to look like for those individuals to have a paper-based version of their vaccination status that they would be able to show when they check into a venue, that potentially is something that, of course, is more easy to forge, even if you're then showing your identity, proof of identity, such as a passport or a driver's licence. That's then layering up the complexity for the venue to have to check and police those documents. So there is definitely an issue here with implementation.
And what about people who can't be vaccinated for one reason or another? Kate, what do they do?
So presently, people who can't be vaccinated for medical reasons are entitled to a medical exemption that would be recorded on the Australian Immunisation Register. So there's a form that already exists for that. It's sitting on the website right now, and it's the form that's been used for many years for parents whose children cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons, but are subject to no jab policies, no jab, no pay, or no jab, no play. So those parents and their children are basically logged as being in good standing and being legitimate as far as their vaccination status goes by virtue of having that medical exemption logged on the Australian Immunisation Register. Now, the form I'm talking about has been updated and does include COVID-19 vaccines and a very limited set of circumstances in which a medical exemption applies. So individuals can get that exemption through their doctors. And once that is logged on the Australian Immunisation Register, then presumably the communication of those people's status being in good standing would travel across to the state-based apps that they are linking to, and therefore those people would be able to demonstrate that although they are not vaccinated, they do have a legitimate medical exemption. But states may also need to consider if there are further exemptions that they wish to apply for these vaccine passports. And so yet again, we find ourselves entering the world of complexity.
Yeah. And when international travel starts up again then, Katie, how will the double vaccine information be attached to your passport? And will that information be acceptable in venues overseas?
So these are all really important questions, and some of, again, the details remain to be seen. What we're hearing at the moment is that our vaccination status would be embedded into the chip in our passports. So our modern passports, if you haven't had yours replaced recently, the modern ones are quite high-tech instruments, and there's the statement is that that will actually be in the chip. Our vaccination status will be recorded there. But when we go to another country, we will have a QR code that that the governments or the authorities in those countries will be able to scan that shows that we are fully vaccinated. But an additional issue there comes in around what kind of vaccines people have had. So, for example, our government at the moment is saying that we're only recognising the vaccines that are approved by the TGA. So in other countries, for example, America hasn't used AstraZeneca as part of their rollout, but they have approved it for emergency use, which means they recognise it, they understand that it's a legitimate vaccine. But again, there's going to be a lot of work required between countries to harmonise these mechanisms and to make them work. But when you think about things like e-passports and how they work and can be read by a variety of countries, we know that this kind of cooperation has already been happening for many years.
Lots of questions still to be answered from the sound of it. Dr. Katie Atwell, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Roz.